This week on the Shameless podcast.
Entering a season of extreme social distancing, and therefore you are all to stay home from this point forth. Now, note, we've squeezed all the savings that we had at the time. We squeezed all the money because the idea was if we put in all this money for now, we'll invest and get ready for these 4 contracts. And one by one, the emails that are coming in from these customers. Look, unfortunately, extreme circumstances. We can't sign this thing until we know what's really going on. That's one. Second customer, third customer, all 4 customers, they all canceled. And all of a sudden, we're finding ourselves with these fixed overheads we've just put on the table.
Sometimes we are afraid to do something. You fear shame. I don't want shame. We're trying to break that burden by sharing stories of courage, resilience, and we want to be able to celebrate your story.
Shameless.
Welcome. My name is Zika Making Guides, and I'm the host of the Shameless podcast. So today, we are joined by Tavonga. And it's an absolutely pleasure having you on the Shameless podcast. Welcome today.
Thank you.
And today's topic actually is, should we be afraid of AI and is it going to take away our jobs? Is essentially what we're going to be talking about. And before we go into that, Tonga, I got a question. When you hear AI, what do you typically, what is the first thing that goes through your mind? Like, you are an expert in this field. What goes through your mind when you hear the word AI?
Artificial insemination.
I did not see that coming.
Look, I think for me, I don't by any means call myself an expert in AI. All I can say and I claim is that I am a practitioner in the field. I have been so for the better part of the last 6 years. And I think for me, a big part, again, I will always be technical about it because it's not an abstract concept for me. It's something that I've lived for the last couple of years. And when I think about the subject itself, all I can think about is the potential of allowing computers to be able to understand the context of information, understand what to do with the information around it, and for us to be able to empower it to help us to make different types of decisions that we wouldn't have been otherwise able to do as human beings. And so that's essentially what I look at AI as, both, of course, as a concept and also something that I've lived a reality of over the years seeing.
So, Tonga, I love that. And what that is going to lead me into now is maybe just giving everybody a little background of what and who you are, right? So that we can jump straight into this. So, you are an award-winning entrepreneur and the managing director of Xavier Africa, which is an AI development agency that serves blue chip companies and government entities across Botswana, South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Angola. I mean, the list is more and long, but mainly across Africa. You specialize in cost-effective, high-impact AI solutions, and notably, you have led the development of an award-winning systematic risk monitoring platform for a Southern African financial regulator. That sounds like pressure right there. That sounds like pressure. Was it the BRICS? Was it the BRICS currency that everyone keeps talking about?
I'm tight-lipped. Just one NDAs that I signed over there. If I break them, I might just end up bankrupt for the rest of my life.
No, we don't want
to pay that back.
No, we don't want that. And even worse off is that I'll be liable for some version of that story, or I'll be in the same courtroom explaining away like, no, it was an innocent question, but suddenly I don't want.
You'll be a party to the crime, essentially.
Hey, that's essentially it. So no thanks. So, just another quick one is that you also the chairperson of the Tech and Products Committee at the International Digital Economic Alliance, where you lead large-scale technology innovations across 70 countries, representing 80% of the global population. Now, I'm going to jump back into that because that sounds very interesting. But before we get into this, my question is why? What made you end up being interested within the AI space, venturing into sort of the entrepreneurial world and setting up this company?
Look, I think for me, it's always been a very simple matter. Um, my personal goals or my personal ambition has always been to restore African pride. And I say this all the time and use the particular word of restore because I am a strong Pan Africanist. My voice just isn't loud enough for me to thump on the tables and blame the colonizers for everything. But I'm a very strong believer in that if you look at the foundational innovations that were started across the world, those foundational innovations came from this continent. You want to look at, for example, the very first fire that was made right here on this continent. You want to look at, things like the very first and oldest paintings that you can find. They are found on our walls. And even, scientific evidence will show you that the very first equations, the mathematical equations, they were first solved here on this continent. But somewhere along the way, when things like the first computer was made, when the first cars were driven, when the first light bulbs were switched on, we were missing an action.
Yeah.
And since then, as we've moved from industrial revolution from one to the next, we found ourselves playing catch up and quite frankly, waiting for other people to innovate on our behalf. And as a result, for me as a Pan Africanist who doesn't have a voice loud enough to thump my fingers and my toes, it only made sense for me to be able to contribute in my own small way through commerce to be able to build an organization that would help us to solve some of the key problems that we have on the continent using an exponential technology. Because quite frankly, that's the good thing about this work we're doing, that we will do it one time and we'll be able to solve for millions and millions of people. And so that's essentially, the why behind the work that I'm doing today. I want to be able to not be part of the complainers and the mourners and the criers, but rather I want to be able to get to a point whereby we can build good and proper solutions that can get us to a point where we solve our own problems in our own way and ultimately recapture that pride and greatness of being an African.
And so that's I love that in for multiple reasons because um recapturing or regaining that pride is um it's with us. I mean, it's with every single individual here in order for us to make the first step in order for this thing to actually make sense and to materialize itself. So I take you up on that, and I guess that's why you're on this podcast, because we're out here to make an impact. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna you said you are based out of Botswana currently, but you are Zimbabwean by birth. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
And so please explain to me how did you end up in Botswana?
Look, my story is a very simple one, and I
Yeah.
will always stick to it. One day, when I was 7 years old, I was minding my own business. I was enjoying my life back down in Zimbabwe in a small city called Gweru. And
Mhm.
I was kidnapped overnight, put in a vehicle, and then found myself in a land that I had no idea of after being kidnapped by my parents.
Yes.
And that's my story, and I'll stick to it. Um, so my parents immigrated to Botswana when I was about 7 years old, like like I satirically said.
Yeah.
And as a result, I've then went on to spend my entire primary school, high school, and then ultimately a big part of my tertiary education in Botswana, of which I finished it off elsewhere. And a big part of it has just been I self-identify, in fact, as a person who benefited out of this land of Botswana, and have believed that I have a responsibility to contribute to the direct development of Botswana. And that's again a very big part of the reason why, out of any country across the continent we could have our headquarters, we've decided to have our headquarters here in Botswana due to my allegiance, to what this country has done for me.
Okay, that's interesting. And when you look at time in Botswana and the idea of growing up, not necessarily in where you would identify sort of as Zimbabwean, would you say what would one memory, one thought, one experience that you would say, either positive or negative, that helped you develop the skills that you're currently using right now as you build a business?
Yeah, look, I think you can imagine. So I'll give you a very simple story of where I came from. All right. So I came from the small city in Zim called Gweru. So this is the third largest administrative city in the country. And what happened is, when I was, I think, in my first or second grade, there was a massive teacher strike that happened in Zimbabwe. And as a result, we had to be taught by what they call student teachers. And these student teachers, ultimately, they had to teach us all the different subjects because the main teachers themselves were not available. And the teacher that we got was a teacher who knew nothing, about English. She couldn't speak English. So she taught us the whole syllabus in Shona. Now you can imagine this, formative experience. All you know is one particular language, and every single thing you know from the education curriculum comes from that language. And then all of a sudden, you find yourself in second term of third grade, in an English medium school in a foreign land. You can barely piece together, words in English, and ultimately you have to find a way to be able to acclimatize into that environment. And so for me, that was one of those defining moments early on in my life that forced me to be able to be resilient enough to settle within that environment and ultimately find a way to be able to thrive. Because you can imagine, I came from Zim, not knowing, a shred of English. And then I had to find myself in this environment where English is all I could speak. And I had to be resilient enough to be able to find my feet. And that kind of resilience is essentially the kind of resilience you need when you build anything meaningful. Because especially in that pivotal period when you're starting from 0 to 1, sometimes it seems like all the different efforts you're putting together, they have no result that they're giving you. In the first year of Xavier Africa, I always jokingly say we made 24,000 pula, which is about 1,500 US dollars.
Yeah.
That's just what that doesn't bear anything.
Yeah.
But it was through that kind of experience when you're starting there, and the seeds you're planting out, and the resilience to think, yes, I could possibly be earning this much, on a monthly basis in a company somewhere if I take the junior practitioner way. However, staying resilient in the course and understanding that one day we'll be able to get to where we want to. That's a very critical thing that I think I can attribute directly to that experience of moving, from Zim, and then being forced to come and change my ways here.
Well, no, that's brilliant. And so when you then look at the journey of building Xavier, right?
Yeah.
If you had the one moment where you were like, where you put your hand on your head and you're like, you know what, this that same
Yeah.
resilience you talk about, you're like, this is now I'm done. Like was there a moment where you ever felt like, I'm just gonna go get an employee number somewhere and I'll survive just fine. Is there an experience like that? Sort of, how did you? Can you maybe take us through it?
Every 2 weeks or a monthly, boss. Look, this work is incredibly difficult. I don't want to ever sugarcoat it for anybody. And look, when you're working, you've chosen two struggles when you're doing this thing in tech, right? One, you've chosen to work in a very difficult field in terms of what you have to do. Employed or working for
Yeah.
yourself or self-employed or working in a just this field is highly technical and highly difficult, and it's not an easy thing to do. And there's a very high level of stress that's associated with it, and just the technology space alone. Then, or rather, really anything mechanical and engineering, it's, I don't know about other jobs. I think accountants would say the same for themselves, right? But
I don't know. I don't know if accountants.
I can
Look,
only speak to my own experiences,
I think you're fair in saying what you said the first time, but we'll give it to the accountants in the who are listening in.
Listen, I love the accountants. They signed my check, so I don't know about you. And so, one, you've chosen a very complicated field of practice to work with. And then, two, of course, you found yourself in this wild west whereby, one, you have to prove a value proposition that you can be able to deliver a high level of value to a large set of clientele. Two, you have to be able to figure out how to provide that value in an economically viable manner and way. Three, you have to find the right people who can be able to complement you and work with you and allow you to be able to get to where you need to get to. And so combining those two worlds is bound to be a, a life, a complicating mechanism that I wonder what I was thinking when I was getting into it. I can attribute and give you a very simple time. Early in the early days of the company, I don't know if I could say early days per se, but just before the COVID pandemic, we were at about 4 employees, I think, or about 40 members, if I'm not mistaken. And we just opened a new office in Fairgrounds. So Fairgrounds is one of the parts of the city that's not very cheap, but we found ourselves a little corner within Fairgrounds where we were paying about, I think, 2,500 pull up a month, if I'm not mistaken, in rent. And this little room that we had was enough for the five of us. So that's just four. For the five of us. It was five of us at the time, I remember. And in 2020, we're looking at, okay, this is the time that we're now starting to really gain traction. This is around March. We're about 4 organizations that have committed and said, look, we are signing on with you guys. We're going to build a solution with you guys. And all that was pending in all 4 instances were just final signatures. So we went on and decided to say, okay, look, in anticipation for the increase in work, we're going to go and hire more and more people. And we're going to commit to a longer lease, with our office, get faster internet, essentially invest for the future because these contracts are all but signed.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, one fateful Wednesday afternoon, the president of Botswana went in front of the country and he said, we will be entering a season of extreme social distancing.
Yeah.
And therefore, you are all to stay home from this point forth. Now, note, we've squeezed all the savings that we had at the time. We squeezed all the money because the idea was if we put in all this money for now, we'll invest and get ready for these 4 contracts. And one by one, the emails started coming in from these customers.
Ish.
Look, unfortunately, extreme circumstances. We can't sign this thing until we know what's really going on. That's one. Second customer, third customer, all 4 customers, they all canceled. And all of a sudden, we're finding ourselves with these fixed overheads we've just put on the table, which would essentially almost double the current expenditure that we were struggling to pay at the time. And now the contracts are gone. And in the bank account of the company, there was three puller, 1, 2, 3. That was all that was remaining. You know, you can't even withdraw that out of the bank account if you want to. And I recall to this day that it was a very hot 40-degree Botswana afternoon, but I went straight into my mui mui, the double thick blankets, with my shoes on. Because
It was.
it was one of those moments. And when you look at a situation like that, and there's been so many situations over the years that have come up where you're looking at the situation, you're like, this one we're done for sure. But I think, look, I always attribute to God that He's been able to help us through some of these situations that we found ourselves in, because there's absolutely no hope for us to survive 2020. To be very honest with you, there
Yeah.
was a time in 2022 when there was almost no hope that we were going to survive, and every single day that we were given, quite frankly, has just been a bonus from the guy above, and he's all I can attribute this to.
Nah, that's beautiful, and again, I guess it just touches on that whole idea of, sometimes you might not know or see where or how you're going to get out of a situation,
Yeah,
but but you, after you get out the blankets with your shoes on, you get up on those shoes, and you look for those opportunities, you look for anything, you hold on to the hope of getting things to a better space, and that
yeah,
then gives you the next day to live to, and the next day, and then you just take it one day at a time. So for me, I find that absolutely fascinating, but I said to you that I want to come back to some of the work that you are doing. And
yes,
you mentioned to me before that you've got three essential sectors within the business. Could you maybe
yeah.
just give just a touch light touch before I then ask you about your role within the International Digital Economic Alliance?
Yeah. All right. So the my practice at Xavier Africa is really I like to categorize and group it into three areas. The first area that we look at is our practice concerning computer vision. Computer vision meaning whereby we take footage and we take images and allow a computer to be able to understand what is currently going on within those images, and then going on to give feedback to the user or a decision about what is currently going on. And so with our computer vision, a lot of the work we've been doing there is in the mining space, whereby we're contributing to keeping mines safer by monitoring for the behaviors that are currently going on within, some of the open pits, as well as some of the underground mines, as well as looking at unsafe behaviors that might be going on, for us to be able to tag it, capture it, and then be able to get intervention going on before the situation turns deadly or injures somebody significantly.
So
The second, oh
before
yes,
you move
sorry,
on from that, so I'm actually very interested because you essentially are, I guess, splicing out a feed from a camera that's live, and you are just as it's recording. You are running an algorithm that says this guy is, for you lack of a better word, wearing his hard hat, or he's not.
yeah,
He's in an area that he shouldn't be in, and you then are able to further use essentially what is a CCTV camera to
mm-hmm,
trigger events, whereas the old way would be there's a guy sat there in front of the screen waiting for something to happen, and when it happens, hey, Roger, I see you,
yeah,
stop doing that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
essentially you are in a way making it a more productive and a more uh, rep you can get the results in a more reliable manner by having this visual aid assist you.
Yes. So you see, where we sit now, right, is obviously there's the first layer, which is just monitoring, right? So that's essentially saying that guy's not wearing hard hat, that guy's doing this, that's the first layer of what we do. The second layer goes a bit deeper than that, whereby we then now try to predict based on actual behaviors. So, for example, if there's a machine on the mine that we know that this machine cuts people's fingers off, generally we've been able to map behaviors that happen before your finger gets cut. So if there's 5 steps, for argument's sake, before you get your finger cut, by the time you get to step 3, we are able to recognize those patterns so that we can be able to intervene early before an adverse event happens. So this is
Okay.
really the kind of space that now we've been playing in, beyond just monitoring and reporting what has happened. Now we are
Uh,
now looking beyond that to say, can we predict the next thing that might happen before it happens so that we actually prevent the occurrence from happening?
Beautiful. All right.
Yeah.
Now, fully understand that. So the second one then, now go for
All
it.
right. So the second category that we work within is in what we call natural language processing. So the idea of natural language processing, I think nowadays pretty much everyone has been able to experience some level of natural language processing through tools like ChatGPT, Bard, Gemini, all these Claude solutions that are online, whereby this is the practice by which you teach a machine to be able to understand natural language. So previously, machines, they understand zeros and ones. That's how it works. And computer code traditionally is the language in which we've been able to communicate with machines, to ask them to do things for us or to help them tell us, what is currently going on. But now we are now in a new wave, if I can say, whereby using natural language or just the way you and I are talking, one can be able to communicate with the computer. So within that practice of hours of natural language processing, we are currently powering several call centers. So these are multinational call centers to be able to actually automate the role of a call center agent and replace these IVR machines that will say press 1 to do this, press 2 to do this, press 3 to do this, but rather from the moment somebody engages on a call, they can have a direct conversation, sort of like the way that you'd have with a human being, but not nearly as good as a human being yet, to be very frank with you, but much better, of course, than press 1, press 2. And then if the AI can handle the conversation, it can handle the conversation all the way to the end. But if the AI is not able to handle the conversation to full, it actually then just escalates to a human being at a more advanced stage and level. So at the end of the day, you're finding that we're able to handle almost double the volumes of a normal call center this way, whilst also minimizing the cost of running those call centers by up to 50%. So essentially, you bring a massive value add to some of these environments and being able really to contribute to making that environment better. And that's sort of that layer that we're doing with natural language processing.
So the one thing that I hate is when I've got a problem and then it's
Yeah.
like, so to please repeat your question, to go to, and I'm like, hey, I
Yes.
want to
Yes.
speak to a real
Yes.
person. So that's
Mm,
essentially you getting
mm,
that out.
mm.
But my worry then is I've listened to some of these AI generated voices and the rest of it. At what
Mhm.
point does it become like, I want just like, because they can get real and um
Yeah.
is that the aim? I mean, is the call center your ideal view that it should be indistinguishable between a person and a computer? Is that what you're aiming for?
Look, I think one of the key things that we need to understand is that as a human being, especially when it comes to outbound calls, you don't want to talk to a robot.
Mm.
Nobody wants to talk to a robot. This is the real truth, if you and I
Yeah,
can be honest with each other.
yeah,
And
I
so
don't.
the only way, right, to be able to then tap into these technologies at scale is if we can be able to come up with AI voices that can actually be able to sound like a human being so that we avoid having the change curve go to the left. But of course, it's also very necessary for us to be smart about how we deploy these technologies. Because if you deploy these technologies recklessly, you'll find a point in time where scammers can be able to tap into that same technology that you're using to scale up your call centers to become more efficient, to actually now cause harm to other people. So that fine line now, in building those technologies is essentially that fine line that we've constantly been working to try and manage. And I've personally been working with regulators across the continent and even in the Middle East and Asia to try and see how do we actually make sure that yes, we're trying to solve this business problem, but also making sure that we don't cause and create a new problem for everybody else.
Yeah, that's fully understood.
Yeah.
So the last one, before we then now, I've got now so many questions about the topic. So the
Yeah.
last one, your third leg on your business.
Right. So that leg of the business is in what we call bespoke, AI solutions. So now this is now way, way more open and really where we know quite a bit of our work really is sitting. And in this bespoke work, a lot of it now then depends on organizations. So, for example, that systemic risk monitoring platform that we are talking about earlier on was actually a platform that was commissioned for us to be able to use past and historic data about a financial system in a country, and then look at the areas and times when that financial system was under threat or when the system was facing severe, risk, and then trying to map to see if we could be able to predict at any given point in time if the system was going in a similar direction so that regulators could be able to intervene much faster than having to reactively react to that particular situation. So that is, that area. And then it differs really. Some organizations, for example, they'll say that they're currently looking for a solution, for instance, where they're saying that, look, we think our suppliers are ripping us off. We've got 10,000 suppliers, and people give us a specific price, but they don't deliver the same level of quality. But it's impossible to manage and monitor that kind of stuff. And then so we use different types of AI algorithms now, using supervised and unsupervised learning to then be able to come up with solutions that can help these organizations be able to solve those. So again, in that catalog, there's I wouldn't finish talking today if I went into details of those. Yeah.
So you know what? I mean, I've heard everything you said, and you know what? I'm going to be quite frank about it. All of these things just make me feel as though the future has less jobs for people and humans, and that leads me naturally into is AI coming for your job? Here's how to stay unemployed proof. What is your take in the idea that your call center can be 50 times 50 or double the productivity by implementing a natural language processing? Computer vision has got the ability to not only monitor, but even to predict beyond what probably a human might be able to do using historical information. The second that you start bringing bespoke tools, you're able to do a lot more. And I know this is it's a very awkward conversation or a very tough space to put you in, but all of those things in my mind are going to mean that there's less jobs for certain people in this world. What is the truth? What is the hard truth that we have to then own up to as people within the African continent?
Definitely, definitely. Look, I always try to be as objective as possible when it comes to this conversation, largely because there's a very interesting line between theory and practical that
Mm.
some of the AI suppliers have come to blur, that being one, and two, have gone on to make some very, very misleading claims about jobs being lost and the real capabilities of some of these solutions. Right now, in a lot of the context that we've deployed some of these solutions, what we're seeing is that even state of the art at a production level, there's always humans in the loop. So humans in the loop, meaning that, for example, in that call center environment, there's always human beings who are ready to take over a call from an AI, for example. And those
Mm.
human beings are the ones that are continuing to do what we call reinforcement learning by training those AIs further for them to be able to understand whether this is the right behavior to behave in or not. Same thing in the safety environment. Same thing in some of the bespoke solutions. So the way that I kind of look at it at the moment, at least, is that yes, we might then face some job losses that are coming in, up front. However, I think that the productivity gains that will overly come from this AI space, they will result in a temporary job loss situation. However, I think there'll be so much more economic productivity that is coming out into the world and across the continent that will be able to do much more than the human beings could do on their own in solving some of these problems. And as a result, now as we bring those outcomes in, we'll be able now to create a much larger set of jobs that are potentially even more rewarding than the current jobs of some of these routine and repetitive tasks have currently been. And so that's generally how, I've been able to see some of these situations. So for example, you're looking at a situation whereby in some of our mining environments, there were some people who were security guards before. And we took these people who were security guards before to now start manning some of our computer vision projects. And so now they're responsible for contributing to the reinforcement learning of these algorithms. And they're able to actually earn almost double what they earned before. Of course, we don't need as many people in that position as we did before, but in this case, we've contributed to making the mines much safer. And if they're much safer, productivity doesn't slow down, and ultimately we can hire more and more people within the mines and have more productivity, such that in this case, ultimately, we'll be able to create much more of these higher quality jobs for these people. So better outcomes, better quality of jobs, and ultimately, we'll be able to get to a point where this sort of temporary setback of structural unemployment that might come in might end up now leading to a net benefit for us. So that's just how I kind of see this coming together.
And that's interesting, because I guess the idea here is we increase the base of productivity. By increasing the base of productivity, everyone is got an opportunity to also grow. But then my question then lies around, as an individual, and there's a phase, right? So maybe right now we're not necessarily fully in a space where you will remove a human being, and maybe we'll get there at a future state.
Yeah.
But what is the is it a necessary evil for people now to start more than ever and to be more fixated than ever to find that interest in AI, in understanding what this industry is about? Because I'll use the example of ChatGPT, right? Right now, I thought spell check was bad because I didn't know how to spell, and that solved my problem. And now, if I'm writing, I can't spell, but if I'm texting, I can. But even worse off is ChatGPT is now rewriting or rechanging the way that emails are drafted, the way that letters are drafted, the way that, because you can just give it to it and it will give you back. So, from a personal productivity standpoint, I, as an individual, am a lot more productive. Compared to somebody who's not using the same tools that I might be using. What are you seeing in that space? And what then would the advice be for people who might want to actually just sit on the back burner and not necessarily participate and really hold the fort because they don't want to learn?
Yeah, look, I think there's this saying that guys have been circulating. I'd be wrong if I tried to claim it as my own original thought. But there's this saying that's been ongoing that says, at the moment, AI is not going to take your job, but a person who understands how to use those tools will. And I think it's a very big part of understanding that if you're able to understand how to use the tools, the AI tools that are currently available today, you will be in a much better position than somebody else who doesn't. But at the same time, even after we say that, we also need to understand this other, thing that my IT teacher back in Form 1 told me, and I'll never forget it. It's called garbage in, garbage out, or GIGO. If the inputs of what you're giving these machines today is garbage, you will get garbage out. And so it again becomes another necessary part to say what's more important is not understanding how to use the tools. What's more important is understanding how to solve problems and then using those tools to augment you so that you can be able to be in a better position. So I always give this example to say, look, everyone is rushing to say, let's teach the kids how to code. I'm not in the exact same thinking frame because my understanding is that let's first teach people and kids how to problem solve. When a child looks at a particular problem, we need to teach them how can they be able to get to the root cause of the problem through systematic thinking, and then how can they be able to break down the problem into small little bits, and then how can they be able to analyze those small bits of problems and subparts, and then how can they be able to then create a solution for it. Because we're getting into a paradigm now whereby if you can systematically break down a problem, your inputs into these technologies will be much, much better than one who cannot break down the problem to be able to solve it. And ultimately, then the root thing to teach kids today, and even adults and even everybody else, is to learn how to solve problems. Once you learn how to solve problems, then these tools can augment you to a level whereby you can be able to get to a very high level much quicker than everybody else, and you can ultimately be more productive. But again, that's currently my stance, and I'm just one guy, in a little city in Africa.
No, but the reality of it all for me becomes um, reinventing yourself, right?
Yeah,
So if if something that in last 10 20 years ago, right, if that skill was useful and it's no longer useful, what value does that give, right? And so if you don't have a mindset where you identify that as a problem, you identify how to resolve that problem by breaking out of into bits, and then you get to a solution and reinvent yourself, right? And that is whether it's reinventing yourself or looking at a problem and getting to a better solution by using different tools. Those are all things that a mindset has to be taught, and you have to be conscious about taking those steps, as opposed to just saying, you know what, this is what that looks like, and I'm just going to wait for my savior. Because I mean, your point about restoring the pride of Africa, right? It is you in order to restore, we have to be problem solvers. We have to find the ways to address our own issues. And so when you are looking now into the future, what does that look like in your view for within Africa? Because you talked about us being a catch-up or consumeristic state. How do we participate more? What do people need to do? What is that challenge that we have to then put forward as a call to action for people?
yeah. Look, I think one of the most important things that I will say, and I will say it very proudly, with no fear, with no nonsense across my face, is that we've got to really move from a point of complaining and moaning and crying and thinking that there is some savior from somewhere who's going to come and uproot us from the problems that we currently have, and all of a sudden life will be perfect. Betway is not going to save your life, and I'm going to say their name by name. The Lotto is not going to change your life, overnight. That's a very edge case. You're not going to pick up $1 million in the dustbin and change your life. And this is a very important and critical component that I think we need to really understand. To say, to get ourselves out of where we are today, we need the courage individually to step out of our comfort zones and decide that we want to start to create solutions to solve our problems. And the solutions to our problems doesn't just mean building a technology somewhere, for example. Don't get me wrong. It could literally mean some very, very simple acts of sacrificing in order to get society to a better place. And this thinking, if we can all be able to have that level of thinking at the different levels that we have, as Africans, then I'm sure that we'll be able to start now moving in the kind of positive momentum that we need and require for us to be able to change our narrative, and for us ultimately to be able to change the direction of our continent. And so I think that's the one big thing that I will always say, I will always preach, and I'll say it all the time.
Now, you know what? So I've found this really informative in terms of a discussion, and what I am going to close with in terms of the quote for today's episode is, um, it is resilience is a choice. It's choosing to rise above your circumstance, no matter how difficult, and become the person you are meant to be. And Tavonga, in your story, I this quote emulates for me quite a lot of different things that you have shared with us. And the first portion of this sits in the idea or the fact that you are Pan African. And so, and you
Yeah.
believe on the idea of restoring the African pride. And that talks to
Yeah.
the last part of that statement of becoming the person you're meant to be, or impacting the society to become the the society that you would like to see. And even if you've, and though you moved from Zimbabwe to Botswana, not knowing a lick of English and finding yourself being in a space where you have to learn to not only the language but also the new culture. And I don't know how you got over the traumatic experience of being kidnapped at the age of 7, but we won't
Can
hold
you
them
imagine?
against. I can't, and we won't hold it against you because it turned out okay, right? But at the end of it all, it
Yeah.
was all about that circumstance that you found yourself in, finding the resilience and choosing to do and be more and rise above it. And so for what it is and what you've demonstrated, not only in your personal growth and development, but also bringing that into your business, right? The efforts that you had to make, turning your business from a 0 to a 1, 24,000 pula in your first year, and you getting in your blankets, shoes on and everything, 40 degrees, and you were like, you know what, I lost all 4 contracts. I've doubled my fixed overheads, and here I am, 5 people deep, fairgrounds, long lease, and internet, everything. You were in with both feet, and I can only imagine in that moment, your circumstance felt like it would defeated you. And that's, I guess, why you went into bed and probably slept at 5 a.m. at 5 p.m. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the reality was that you stood up, you woke up, and you brushed off any anything that was the situation that you were in, no matter how difficult it was. You then said, you know what, we're gonna step forward, we're gonna find a way out of this. And again, you mentioned in 20, you said 2022 as well, you found yourself. And the reality of it all is that these challenging times never end. I mean, it's a continual version of the next challenge and the next issue. And the beauty about what you talked about is that you need a solid and a resilient mindset. But even more so than that, is you need to be able to problem solve. You need to be able to
Yeah.
problem solve your way through your resilience, but more so into the world that we're going to, where AI is going to be a significant role player in being able to maximize productivity for companies. Each individual is going to have to find their way of problem solving, their relevance within society. And that is going to
That's
require a
it.
lot of resilience. And quite frankly, your answer around, is AI, somebody using AI will replace somebody who's not. I mean, that is a rudimentary and a first step, because at the end of the day, those critical thinkers, people who have practiced and who have put their mindset into developing the skill of breaking down issues and challenges into small bits, analyzing the task and the information at hand, and then providing a solution. Those are the people who are going to be able to provide better inputs into the AI technology that we are seeing around, but even better, then maximize the value that they get out of it. This journey that you have walked, this story that you have shared, not only shares with us or shows us the resilience that you've had to have in your own story, but also the fact that others are going to have to build the same level of resilience or beyond in order for us to be able to build the society that we want to see tomorrow. Obviously, I haven't spoken about the wonderful products that you are deploying and the way that you're impacting into the society, but I mean, that speaks for itself, and it speaks volumes in the award winning and the fact that you are in the different spaces that you are in. For me, Tavonga, it's been an absolutely pleasure having you on this. And I'm gonna put forward a challenge, right? The
Yeah.
challenge to everybody listening to this podcast is, I'll put the option of one or two. The first one is, you can either decide to learn and explore one AI tool. If you leave today and you go in and explore one AI tool, you become a little bit more versed and you understand how this could augment your current circumstances and your challenges in your spaces. That'll be amazing for you to do. But the second of the alternative option in terms of a challenge is, what skill do you need to work on in order for you to be a better problem solver? And by that, for me, potentially could be listening better, um, improving analytics. And I always believe that a lot of this comes down to practice, practice, practice. You find yourself in a circumstances and you are very conscious about, this is a problem, frame it as a problem, and then after you frame it as a problem, rather than just complaining, you then probably could um, apply yourself maybe differently. So this is to everybody listening. That is the challenge that we've set for this episode. And Tawonga, I'll give you a chance maybe to say a couple parting words.
Yeah, no, thank you so much once again for the invitation. I know we wanted to do this for a while, and finally, at least we managed to get it done.
Yeah.
Uh, I think for me, the most important thing, and quite frankly, sometimes it sounds like I am being rude when I say this as a parting shot, but I think it's medicine that is really needed. We need to stop moaning, we need to stop crying, we need to stop being victims, and we need to develop the agency within each of our own selves to go out there and solve our problems. And quite frankly, solving our problems doesn't just mean that go and learn how to code or how to use some AI tool somewhere. But solving our own problems means, for example, if you're in a place and it's essentially a dump site, everybody is putting rubbish in one area. Agency means that instead of complaining that there are so many flies in the area, you go start picking up that rubbish and start taking it away and doing your part. Agency means that if you're in an environment, for example, that is plagued with GBV, as a social ill that we've started to see over the years, you actually decide, to start doing something about educating the people around you. You start doing something about starting to actually hold people accountable. The same thing again when it comes to agency stems again in then trying to solve the more macro problems that are on the ground, and then going on to believe that life doesn't have to be linear. Life has to be about looking for those very big problems that are on the ground, solving them, and having the agency to stand it out, to go all the way to committing to getting the job done. Because ultimately, we can only solve and fix our continent if each and every single one of us build the necessary agency to decide and go out there and go and solve those problems, regardless of how small. If we do that and we adopt that, I can promise and I can guarantee you that this golden generation of Africans will not go wasted and will be able to get to where we need to get to.
Absolutely wonderful, and I love that it's part of, and as part of the Seamus podcast with Transformation Leader, we aim to impact 1 million lives by 2026. We love to have people like Tavonga in the mix, forcing and having that agency to make and drive that change. So Tavonga, thank you so much for joining us today. Let us continue the good work, and at one step at a time, right? Like, so you go out there, do your thing. We'll be here doing our thing, and let's meet in the middle, and let's really make a really good effort at this. I really appreciate you taking the time and you having the discussion with me today. So
Yep.
thank you very much, and have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
All right.
This podcast is brought to you by Transformation Leader. You can follow us at www.t4leader.com.